Hello. Right, we need to just do a bit of a check because I'm a Brownie leader, so I can usually project my voice. But can you all hear me? Does anybody want us to do the whole headmistress thing over here? Do you want us to do this? Oh, good. I don't like doing that. So fab. Thank you. So, actually, I need this thing first, don't I? Right. Are you at the right session? Yeah? Great. All about networks. Fab. So, a quick check. Could you just do a bit of a hands up? Oh, I am a bit of a headmistress now. Hands up if you lead a network. Okay. Then hands up if you're just in a network. Oh, loads. Oh, good. Hands up if you're thinking about getting in a network or setting one up. Not so sure yet. A few of you. Fab. Hands up if you're in the wrong room. You're like, uh-oh, how do I get out now? Great. Okay, so the title of this session is If I've Got Time to Moan, I've Got Time to Act. There's a reason for that, and that's because it's a saying that I say to myself all the time because I like moaning. Is anyone else with me? Do you like moaning about stuff? I love it. I absolutely love it. But there is a difference, and that's that I stop myself moaning because I just keep going on forever. And that if I've got time to moan, I've probably got time to roll up the sleeves and just get on with it. And that has been my ethos of networks since day one when I co-founded the Environment Agency's Women's Network. So I thought it was an apt title for a talk, really. But did you notice that Dodds didn't put that on the programme? But let's go over to Louise to introduce ourselves, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Louise Ward-Hunter's my name. I am a civil servant working in Northern Ireland, and I don't know whether anybody is over. Oh, hello, how are you? Good to see you there. So a brief description of who I am and where I came from inside a couple of minutes with a little pictogram. Graduate of Manchester University, where I studied English. Feels like about 1 million years ago now, but to give you an idea, in 2 years' time, I will be going with my university mates on the Camino to do the big walk to celebrate, and I think we met 40 years ago. So 2 years' time, there's a bunch of us will have known each other 40 years. So that gives you a sense of my vintage. Couldn't wait to get out of Belfast. Manchester was fantastic, bit like Belfast, big old Victorian city, but with no views of the sea. My first job afterwards was, and as I said, I was the most qualified shop girl that Hagenbachs the bakers ever had. I started work for the Allied Bakeries, part of a big food conglomerate, and I was quite an unsuccessful retail graduate trainee. So I was really, really good with the customers, but I didn't know how to do stock takes. So I moved on swiftly from that, having got a reputation for being able to sell 10 pallets of bread on a Saturday night in the Stretford Arndale, medium, thick and thin, 30p a loaf. Come one, come all. They knew I had a talent, but it wasn't for them. So I moved on. My career after that was a bit of revolving doors. I started in the private sector. I joined the civil service, moved to London, joined the civil service in London, where I worked for the Lord Chancellor's Department, a very sleepy backwater called the Lands Tribunal, and that really was mind-numbing after about 18 months. So I burled round again, went back into the private sector and worked for a whole area around conference producing, which was really great. That seemed to harness some of the skills that I clearly must have had. Somebody saw them, and still in touch with those old colleagues as well. So the revolving doors brought me into the whirlwind of family. I got hitched a fella, as my mother said, all the way to bloody Hammersmith to marry a fella from Belfast. And it's true, that's what happened. So we headed back to Northern Ireland. We had our daughter here. I was staying with her last night. She now lives up near Hyams Cross. And so she was born at the North Middlesex Hospital, and she, like a little salmon, has headed back to London, back to her homing grounds, and she's living there. But I have 2 lads, they're at home. And I suppose motivation around family has been a very important thing. It's always about trying to change and shape the world that you'd want your young people to flourish in. So that's been a bit of my story. But the Northern Ireland piece for me was about going home to try and make a contribution, and that's where you see that little image of the Hands Across the Divide, which is an iconic sculpture up in Derry, and that in the northwest of Northern Ireland, and that for me was where I spent 10 of my career years was running an organisation called Common Purpose, which is about building civic leadership and linking people across the public, private, voluntary and community sectors. Absolutely loved that. What on earth are you going to do after that? Join the civil service. So I came as an entrant into the Northern Ireland Civil Service and did 5 years, and then back out the revolving doors. 5 years in education. The ministers were doing my head in. Are we allowed to say that? I don't know. I went out and I worked for a big children's charity, back in again, kept on going up, variety of different jobs, justice, you name it, justice, agriculture, and now I'm working in the Department of Communities. And not every job has filled me with passion. Not every job has filled me with passion. There's always been very interesting, people have been interesting, but what has filled me with passion has been setting up the Northern Ireland Women's Network. So I'll tell you a bit more about that. And the little icon at the end is a woman called Katrina and Godfrey and me, who is part of the fabulous stuff that Keil has been doing around this centenary year. We took that up, we climbed Slieve Donard a few months ago on a really hot day. And Katrina, I'm really proud of, because she's going to become one of our next female permanent secretaries. In fact, she's already in post, so that's been a big breakthrough. So that's me in, I hope, 3 minutes. Thank you.
Fab. And then a little bit about me. Oh, by the way, we're on Twitter as well. We like a bit of Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, tweet us, because we love it. So a little bit about me and my network history as well. Graduated, first one to go to university. I'm from a council estate. Can you tell where I'm from? Anyone? Bristol, yeah. It's in the R's. That's where it is. I can't say R at all. Then I only wanted to work for the Environment Agency. But I started off temporary. Did anyone else start as a temp? Or has anyone else done temping? It's an interesting world, isn't it? Because you're not actually in the organisation. So I didn't get training. I didn't go to meetings. I didn't progress at all. But I was temporary for 2.5 years. So not that temporary, really. But I started wanting to be like the youngest chief exec the agency had ever seen. And the confidence, my confidence just went, because I worked for a bit of a rubbish manager. And if you've ever had a rubbish manager, you don't work for the agency anymore, so I can say it now. But it's just, I really learned a lot about leadership and actually about having really good line managers. So I worked for somebody who put me in a box. This was what I was going to do. This is all I was ever good at. These were my skills. And that wasn't what I was about. I needed to show different skills. And then I joined the LGBT network, and then I was asked to lead the network, and I said, no chance, because if I led the network, that would be the biggest way I could out myself in my entire life, and I was not going to do that, because I knew my picture would be on the intranet. So I said no for about a year. And then I decided, just do it, because you're moaning a lot. There's a theme about my moaning. Sorry, I can see the pictures. I'm awful on pictures when I'm speaking. I look at them, right, so hi. So, yeah. Thanks. I've had so many pictures where I'm like, I have a lot of facial expressions, so it's a nightmare. Right, now that's done. A little bit vain, wasn't that? So I became head of the LGBT network and absolutely loved it, because then I was showing skills of leadership that I was never going to do in my day job. My day job was my day job. The LGBT network was what really, really got me passionate and really excited about coming to work every day. Then I started moaning again, because the issues for women weren't being addressed. We had no network. So I was one of the co-founders of the Environment Agency's Women's Network because of moaning. Then I started moaning again after a few years, about 4 years, and I moaned because all these networks get set up, and it's really hard to find out who else is a network lead, and it's quite a lonely place as well as a network lead. So I was like, who's in the Home Office, who's a network lead? It was impossible to find who else is a network lead. So moaned, set up the Cross-Government Women's Network, which is a network of networks. So it's the way to find out who else is a network lead. That then led me to my current job, which is like my dream job, better than like my ambition to be a CEO. I work on the Suffrage Centenary Programme. I get to talk about votes for women and wear a sash for a lot of days of the year. So you'll see me later. I bought my sash because I love it. So I work for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. I don't lead a network now, but I've led networks for over 8 years. And you're not here to listen about us, you're here to think about networks. So I wrote a guide to setting up a network. And that was because I kept getting asked, like, how do you set up networks? What are the real bugbears? What are the positives? And what are the barriers and stuff? So I wrote a guide to it. It was just my experience of the 8 years of leading the network. And I broke it down into 3 distinct phases. I've put my email address there as well, because just email me and I'll send you the guide. So it's a free guide. I'm not going to charge you for it. It's a PDF. So I'll send it over to you. Don't look at the spelling mistakes. But I'm happy to share it. So it goes through 3 distinct phases. The starting up phase, which has barriers, and I would say, like, it's quite hard to get a network started because you've got to convince people there's an issue in the first place. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Because people don't see the issue. Have you ever heard the statement, privilege is invisible to those that have it? So people don't always see that there's an issue if they actually have a privilege themselves. Then the building up phase, and the building up phase is by far the best bit. It's really quite exciting, that bit. And then the momentum. Oh my gosh, keeping momentum's the hardest bit. Has anyone had a network for like a little while? You know, keeping that momentum going after a few years and that energy going is hard, isn't it? Really, really hard. So that's definitely by far the hardest bit. So let's go up to starting up phase. Right, the ones that have got networks, women's networks, gender networks, which one, which type? Women's networks or gender networks? Gender, women's, gender. Oh, that sounded quite 50-50 then, of women's networks, gender networks. I have got to tell you, the name of the network we discussed for 3 months. Oh my gosh, we were just going round in circles, round and round and round. Did anyone else have this when you started a network? Like, right, should we call ourselves a women's network? Should we call ourselves the gender network? And oh my gosh, like, I'm a do-it person, like just get on and do stuff rather than discuss a name. So that's why it's called What's in a Name. There is a lot in a name, but I'm not spending 3 months talking about a name. Let's decide a name, draw a line, move on. And let's go and do some stuff that actually matters a lot more and will actually make change rather than a name. So if you're thinking about setting up a network, don't do what we did and talk about a name for 3 months. Decide a name, move on, okay? So there's lots of politics with regards to the name. You've heard it before. Women's networks, they choose their name because their focus is women. Gender networks feel that they're much more inclusive. What I do find is that gender networks call themselves a gender network, but they still focus 90% on women, which I actually think is quite offensive to men. If you call yourself a gender network, your network should be really 50-50 men and women's actions, including transgender as well. In my opinion, can you tell why I called it the Women's Network? But actually, how we drew a line in the end, we put it to a vote. You know I like votes for women. So we put it to a vote. So we actually went out and said, what do you want to call us? And then we did a vote for it. And that was the most fair way we could do it. The other thing is that we actually ask the same question every single year, because networks evolve. So we actually ask the same question, do you still think our name reflects what we do? Yes or no? And then the network decides. Then, senior leadership, incredibly important. And I don't just mean a gender champion who is there just in name. And I also don't think like you should be really focusing on them to solve all of the issues either, because use them sparingly. That's what I'd suggest with gender champions. They have very busy jobs. You have a very busy job. But a senior leader who you can use sparingly to open doors for you is absolutely phenomenal. So the person on the screen is the gender champion, was the gender champion when we set up the network. She was the person who would speak to the board. She would be the person who would really, really get to that top level. A gender champion, if you, we also wrote like what her role is as well, and we wrote that together as well, which I think is a really good thing. So then the network knows what to expect from the champion knows what to expect from the network. The other thing in the starting up phase, your networks, so you in organizations that are quite dispersed or very like London-centric or, no? Okay, so there's dispersed networks. That was something I learned really, really early on, and that was to really focus on the smallest office that you have. Don't focus on your head office. So I was really conscious to have local leads, and these are just volunteers who put up posters, people who they see in the corridors, because it's all very well coming like saying, well, you need to phone Keela in Cambridgeshire with this issue, but they don't have a clue who I am. It's better if they actually know somebody. So we had local leads right from day one, and that was a visible person that if somebody had an issue, they could go to them, and then that person would then come to me. Then in the starting up phase as well, I work in comms, by the way, but you need a comms plan right from the beginning. So any networks that are thinking about getting set up, get a comms plan in place. I would admit now that we kind of bigged ourselves up to be bigger than we were when we first started, because people like to join a collective. They don't like to join something tiny. So I would say that we did focus on brand quite a bit, and we kind of bigged ourselves up. But the other thing is the objectives as well. We focused on 3 objectives. You find that when networks start, they just want to solve world peace, and just like as many, like you get all of these issues come through to you. I was going to focus on 3. 1 short term, 1 medium, 1 long. And it was going to be done in a year. And then we move on to have some different objectives. I think networks have very, very long objectives, and then you just get tired. It goes back to the energy. Then the really exciting phase, and that was the building up phase. Getting volunteers. You know, volunteers are the lifeblood of networks. They really, really are. But I was always really keen to recognise them as well. So anyone who volunteered in the network, I would email their line manager at the end of the year for their appraisals, just to say how amazing they are. You've got to recognise volunteers, because they are the essence of your network. We do an annual survey as well. And that was because nobody owns the network. The network is owned by the members that are in it. I just led it. So we did an annual survey which evaluated our previous action plan, but also asked questions of what we should do going forward, because going back to evolution. But then most importantly as well, we wanted to know what was happening as a result of the network. We wanted to know how many people had more confidence to go to higher jobs, how many were moving sideways and promoted. And so we were asking questions like that as well. So survey is essential, because you need to know where your network is at right now. Then events. Right, there's advantages and disadvantages to events. And I heard this described as eventitis once, and I think that's a great term, where we just we do as many events as we can, and everybody wants events. Does this resonate with anyone? Everybody asks for events, and then they don't show up. And you're like, but you asked for it, but then you don't turn up, and I don't get it. But because the network members are constantly asking you, we want more events, more events. And events are great, because they build that sense of community. But again, you've got to use your events sparingly. You've also got to be thinking about how to get out to that smallest depot. Don't just have all of your events in your head office. But have a think about what events you could do. So anyone who went on a confidence course we were a nightmare for Women into Leadership. Everyone used to come to Women into Leadership. We used to go, could you take lots of notes? And then, this is really bad, I'm admitting this. And then come and do it as an event back when you actually come back on your lessons learned. And that was a dead easy event. So we used to steal ideas from Women into Leadership, but I don't think they'd mind me telling you that. But, you know, so with events, members ask for it all the time, but don't get into the trap of just doing events, because you've got to focus on your priorities as well. And then we set up a community as well. This is an online community of anonymous blogs as well as discussion forum. If you can set up an anonymous blog, I'd really, really recommend it. So anonymous blog was exactly that. They used to just send me their story, and I would publish it anonymously on our online intranet that was just for Women's Network members. We had stories come out through that about infertility, about loss, babies, and then we had menopause come out through there. We had mental health, depression, and do you know what? That opened my eyes up just to the diversity of women within the Women's Network. In that building up phase, I would say that we were kind of pigeonholing ourselves just into career development, and the anonymous blog were real life stories that people then would support each other on. And so if you can get something like that going, it just really builds that sense of community, but gets people's stories out as well and share. Maintaining the energy. You know, I said this is the hardest bit. Really, really is. The big thing I would say for this section is you've got to adapt. You know what I said about the survey? You've got to be current. So one year we had a big organisational change, so it was a no-brainer that our action plan focused on organisational change and the barriers for women during organisational change. We had a massive web conference with the director who was leading that change programme, just to hear all of the women's experiences of going through change, and actually that was different for men. So that was really interesting. So you've got to adapt your action plan. Don't have an action plan that you keep the same every single year. I'm very good at ending stuff as well. So like, right, we end it and then we move on to the next thing. Apply for awards as well. Has anyone ever applied for the Civil Service Diversity and Inclusion Awards? Oh, you've got to apply for them. It's a really lovely, swanky event. Yeah. So the thing about awards is that it is nice to go to the swanky events, but it gives a real boost. So we won the Civil Service Diversity Award for Gender in 2014 as a network. The boost that it gave to the members was phenomenal. We sent that trophy on tour, and the Environment Agency is all over England. So we sent it on tour, but it was that boost, but it really boosted volunteers as well. I had so many volunteers come forward and say, what can I do? And I love a volunteer. I will find every volunteer a job in the network, not generally. And then adapt your communications as well. So we use Twitter a lot more now. We really changed the way we communicate. We do web conferences, audio conferences, and recordings a lot more as well, like interview recordings. But you've got to keep your energy going as well. And like Louise is going to touch on in a moment, you know, we've still got to go back to what are we doing this for? We're doing this because there are barriers for women. And these are our stats. So this is a really tiny image, but this is 50%. And this is the higher the grade you go. So is when you get to this grade, so grade 3, it's the opposite in the Environment Agency to civil service, but that's the 50% line. That is why we do it. And do you know what? That picture gets rolled out a lot because we've got to remind people why we're doing this. So we keep going back to the actual vision for the network is to enable, equip and encourage women to reach their full potential. And so we always go back to that. So, and just a final thing, remember what I just said to you about the anonymous blog? So an exercise that I did do about, be careful about pigeonholing yourself into just being a network about career development. I actually went out and said, what's your story? Why have you joined the network? And these are just 50 of the speech bubbles that came back. That opened my eyes up to what women wanted in the network. If you can do an exercise like this, I'd really recommend it. Because I would say that I missed quite a few things, menopause especially, and people who are child-free as well. So then again, we adapted the action plan for the next year to focus on menopause and women who are child-free. So that's us. We're now going over to oh, by the way, that's my top tips. So you can nick my statement, it's fine. If you've got time to moan, you've got time to act. Focus on the barriers within ourselves. People usually say that's confidence, but really focus on the programs or policy as well that relate to women. Make sure you're evidence-based. Goes back to being go back to doing surveys. Look at the culture of your organisation as well. I'll talk about a bit like that in the plenary in a moment. And there's a really good guide to engaging men in gender initiatives by Catalyst, and I think it should be on prescription. I think everybody should read it. I'd really recommend it. It is about engaging men in gender initiatives, so I'd really, really recommend that. So, over to your case study.
Okay. So the story that I'm going to tell you is briefly the story about how we went about setting up the women's network in the NICS in Northern Ireland. And this started 4 years ago when in the summer of 2014, the then head of the civil service in Northern Ireland, a guy called Sir Malcolm McKibben, recognising that there was a very obvious imbalance of women at the top of the organisation, and I mean by that there was not one woman permanent secretary in across the 11 departments that we had. we had one grade 2, one permanent secretary equivalent. A permanent second Northern Ireland is a grade 2. We had one equivalent, and she was in the office of Legislative Counsel, so she was a lawyer by background, a brilliant woman called Brenda King. And Malcolm couldn't face this down anymore. It was shocking. It improved. The figures improved a wee bit further down the organisation, but as you could see, it was like a triangle. It was built that women were most represented at the least senior levels, and it tapered on up. So there's something had to be done about that. So we threw out the invitation to the women within the senior civil service to get together and look at this problem. And I think there was that one moment, that heart sort of like beat you'd nearly miss, where we thought, are we being invited into a room to fix ourselves because, you know, we're not getting to these top spots? So women, get you in a room together and you figure out what you're doing wrong. But we didn't take that interpretation of it. We said, not at all. We're going to go and the door's been open. Let's make this work for us. So we had 2 sessions. Big bunch of women from lots of different departments, all, yes, they were at senior, we were at senior grades, but we got together and our issue was to understand what was going on, what were the barriers, what were the challenges, what were the leadership issues facing women, and how could we encourage more women who wanted to make that journey on into the senior civil service. So that was the starting point for us. A bit like Keela said, actually very quickly as we began our discussions and as the network began to develop and to grow, we realised that this was not all about people wanting necessarily to make it to the top, but people becoming fulfilled and enabled and empowered where they were. And that was a really important lesson for us over time. In short order, there were the group of the cross section of women, were 3 core people emerged: myself and 2 other women, and between the 3 of us, we sort of engaging with others, we plotted a journey which would address some of the issues but in slightly different ways. So there was stuff about raising profile and doing stuff for others, so those were events and what we call conversations with a purpose. So there was an opportunity to link in more people, and as we were looking at the sort of the pipeline at that point to the SAS and engaging, as I said, linking the aspiring with the inspiring, so that we had stuff like that. We did some sort of test bed evidence-based stuff to research with other colleagues what they wanted to see and what were the barriers for them, and we began to use that as a way of developing a particular intervention, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And we also looked at, well, what could we do corporately? What could we do to start shifting the culture of the organisation? Because it wasn't all going to be about women talking in to women. It couldn't possibly be that. We needed to move it on from that. So we made the band of 3. There were more of us, but there was a hardcore. And sometimes I think you need that. You need people who will stay with it and take different leadership role. And we had little circles working with us on our themes. So we came up with an action plan which we took to the permanent secretaries group, all male. You won't have seen their faces when one of the other women and I came in to present the plan, and they knew that, you know, they had to change, and they knew that they had to support and mandate where we were going. But we also had to make the case. So the case that we made was, in the first instance, that we needed to appoint a diversity champion from that group. And we were very lucky that the very man that we wanted, and I think that is the bit about engaging with men in a meaningful way and connecting, but we knew he could be a really strong advocate. So we got our first champion at that table. That was a really powerful step forward. And he in turn then created a whole network of diversity champions, one for every department. So a fair play to our colleague Peter May. He then took the vision and made it even more expansive himself. So that was really positive. The second thing was that corporately we made the recommendation about unconscious bias training. There was a lot of laughter about that one until they started doing it face to face and realising that there were things to change. And one of the points for us was, I felt that this was, and others I know subscribed it, that this was a really important lever. If we could begin to shift things for women, we could begin to shift who, in a way, I suppose, are, if you want to talk about minorities, are the largest minority in a sense, and in terms of perception. We could start lifting it in terms of all other aspects of our own diversity. It was about creating a culture that appreciated and respected diversity, and was about inculcating an inclusive approach to how we did things. So that there was a point about women were a lever. The work on women became a lever to be a much more enlightened and inclusive organisation. And we are on that journey. We are absolutely on the journey, but nobody been talking about it really seriously until we got up. There was a focus on action for the senior civil service feeder grades. That's fine, because that's where the problem was so evident, but it wasn't the only place where there was a problem, and which is why obviously we were having networking events and so forth. The Talent Management Action Plan really translated into one key initiative, and this was called the Mentoring Circles Initiative. And what we got was at that time around about a fifth of the grade 6, grade 7 cadre of women in the civil service to join mentoring circles. They were chaired by 2 senior civil servants who were trying to help and support. We designed a programme, so a band of 12 of us went off, trained over a weekend to become mentors, went through the hardcore, designed the programme, designed the outline and the sessions, and the Mentoring Circles Initiative launched. It's now got 2 years under its belt. We're now going to go for a 3rd year, which will begin in January. So we've hit, I think, the guts of 40% of women at that level. In the 3rd session in January, we will be opening up, we'll be creating some circles, roughly 10 or 12 people, supported by 2 leads. We'll be opening up some circles to men as well, men and women, because that was a bit about bringing men with us. And we're now about to start the same initiative for this autumn for deputy principal grade, and there are many more DPs in our service. Incidentally, our service is very small. When you look at the over here, we're tiny in comparison. There's only 23,000 of us, so just to give you an idea. So the Mentoring Circles Initiative is what we've been in a way most known for in terms of the network over recent times. And Kayla talked about the power of winning an award, and we won. Our work won the first. For the first time at the NICS Awards. Last year we won the prize for diversity and inclusion, and I'm telling you, the squeals that went out that day up at Stormont, it was nothing ordinary, but we were really proud, and it certainly made a difference for us. Some of it I've talked about is what was the power about. My language always was about paying it forward. This was about paying it forward, paving the way for others. So whether you wanted to go up the career ladder, whether you wanted to fulfill yourself where you were, whether you wanted to actually be somebody like that who could coach and support others, there was something around seeking to address and evolve into a network that was representative of all of our service, and not simply senior women, and not that the women who were involved ever felt that they were doing something, and in a might I say a patronising way for others. It was because we had a passion about trying to actually change things. So the network has been involved with a corporate initiative to launch a gender action plan, very heavily involved in seeing that's our first one. We haven't had a gender action plan. That was launched earlier this year on International Women's Day, and our colleagues who sit more on the Department of Finance corporate side of the house, they hold that. That's a corporate piece for all of the civil service, but we've been involved, and you can see what the themes are up there: culture and gender stereotyping. And I don't know whether I'm a magnet for it, but I seem to definitely get a lot of the comments over the time. And when I stood up or sat with permanent secretaries and told them what has been said to me to my face, there's a bit where, embarrassed glances to the side, bad language used to me, inappropriate language used to me. And the minute you begin to talk about that type of stuff under culture, it opens up other people have the confidence then to tell you about and the stories that I have heard. If my hair wasn't curly, it definitely would make it curly, because women have had to deal with some really appalling attitudes in the workplace, which erode people, erode their self-esteem, erode their confidence. No place in a modern progressive organisation. So just as well to get a bit cross about these things. But I do think the positive thing is the sharing and the learning. And along that way, can I just say that the men who joined us as co-leaders on the Mentoring Circles initiative, their eyes have been opened, scales have fallen from their eyes, and they are now looking at the challenges in our workforce in a very, very different way. So moving on very swiftly, diversity inclusion, corner of our people strategy. We've had people strategies before, but this one definitely has a different feel to it. We've done some important early steps around, job shares. You'd think a job share, you were a unicorn in the civil service in Northern Ireland if you asked for a job share. I recently had somebody, it was about two women who were going to take a grievance on the fact that they couldn't go for a promotion as a job share to the next layer up. Computer says no. The system was saying no, and then one bit of the system was passing the other and going, no, can't do that, no, you can't do that. No, there's no policy for that. Somebody, bright spark, thought, no, there's no policy for a job share going for promotion. Well, you need to start writing the blinking policy, wouldn't you? Was the answer in that. So quickly, second year of grade 6, grade 7 mentoring circles. Very, very proud of that. As I said before, we've got a launch of the DP mentoring circles, and the whole issue is about cascade. If somebody said, I want to run mentoring circles for AOs, I'd be going, bring it on, but we need people to help us do that. But there is a cascading bit going down the line, and as I say, I mentioned earlier on, we've got a third year planned. Sorry, just to double check, I'm on track. So where are we now? I talked about where it started. It started because of perceived imbalance at the top of the organisation, which is why senior women got involved. And I absolutely think senior women have a role to play. There's no two ways about that. I'm also, to add to the list of titles, I'm also the gender champion in the civil service in Northern Ireland. So chair of the network at the moment. We've got the two aligned at the moment. I will in due course, that's part of the inclusive commitment, I'll step down. I'm going to bring somebody alongside me to be co-chair. I nicked that idea from Kayla. And I'll wean myself off from that bit to stick to the gender champion bit, which I think is fine. I need to play in certain levels, and there's a role in place for everybody. And it can't be seen, I say with one of my colleagues in the audience, it can't be seen as a one person, a one woman show. Absolutely not. That's not what it's about. It is about being inclusive. So you can wear a couple of hats for a time, but then you have to move over and let others join us. So where are we now? We want to make it an inclusive organisation, inclusive network. I have been doing a few sort of like road shows and trying to gather women together to say, well, what do you want in this next iteration? How do we make it more representative of women working at all grades and of people with the diversity of women that we have, with people with different aspirations and different circumstances? So how do we do that? Help me figure out, let's do this together. So those conversations have produced a very simple idea that we'll have 4 geographic hubs. So rather than network, sorry, that's a little bit of a typo. So we'll have 4 geographic hubs, 2 based in Belfast, one in the city centre where the substantial population is, one up on the Stormont estate. Stormont is where any of those of you are interested in watching our political challenges at the moment will see the lovely, beautiful building at the top of the Mile Drive, Stormont. So that is an estate. Loads of civil servants work on that estate. So we'll have one up there. We'll have one up in Northwest, up in Derry and Ballykelly, Limavady direction, which will bring people together in the northwest of Northern Ireland, and we'll have one in Mid Ulster in a town/city called Craigavon. So in and around that. They will nominate a couple of people to join our interim body, our guiding body, so that I can draw the threads together. But they will be charged with doing their own thing, reaching out where they are. We have thematic subgroups bubbling under as well. I've one offered to lead a thematic subgroup, which is around visibility, around role models at all levels and in different ways. That great adage, you cannot be what you cannot see. That's one thing, but we need flexible working role models in particular. So that's a really important bit, and one of the representatives of that subgroup will sit on our guiding body. We've been trying to develop a strategy and an action plan, and I have today a draft email to go out to all the people who've offered to join in, who've said yes, we will sign up for these hubs, because we did one of those like monkey surveys or whatever. So they've signed up, and these women in the 4 hubs will be the ones who will now press the button and take it forward. So it's 4 years to get us from where we started, as I described. We've made an impact on the system. I think sometimes, and I have to say, it is, to be fair, some of the guys, they kind of see me coming towards them and they're going, oh God, here she is again. But you have to just battle on through that, because otherwise you won't achieve the stuff that we need to achieve for colleagues. So we will be active over the autumn. The hubs will be charged with doing one important thing each, so that we're on the map, and we now have, for the first time, an email address as well. And so back to the final bit, sorry I've gone on a little bit, but back to the final slide that I have for you. And this just lets you see a bit of a breakdown, and that was at the 1st of April this year. When we come to April, 1st of April this year, when we come to the 1st of January, the 1st of April next year, we will see movements at the top. I'm delighted to say that we will see that figures change from that really is only 1 woman at the grade 2 level. We will now, by December, in fact, we'll have 4 women at the top of it. That's really, really important. That's going to give us all a huge boost and a huge lift. We still have work to go on, and we do have targets. The Permanent Secretaries Group has targets for something like 40 and 45% to try and turn that balance. But those targets didn't ever have an action plan. Now they do, which is great. And in fact, the reality is the target shouldn't be 40%, there should be 50%. We should be able to see 50% in a truly equal organisation. We need to see that right the way up and down. But the reason why I keep an eye on the stats, on the evidence is, are we having an impact to shift anything for all the women who want the chance to pursue it? And for anybody who doesn't want to pursue it, are we creating a culture which is truly inclusive, which respects diversity, and which gives everybody the chance to be the best they can be in the workplace? So that's our story from Belfast. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.